Hello, everyone, and welcome to our new webinar. Today, we're delighted to co-host this session with our partner, AWS, and we will be discussing AI-driven medical devices. In particular, we'll talk about the validation of AI component in software as a medical device in the context of evolving European regulations, including MDR, GDPR, and of course, the European AI Act. Before we jump into the discussion, let's start with a short round of introductions. My name is Varvara, and I'm an innovations manager at DataArt within the healthcare and life sciences practice. I will be moderating today's session, and I'm very happy to welcome our speakers. I'll let you guys introduce yourselves.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for having me today. My name is Sara, and I am a Quality and Regulatory Affairs Senior Manager at DataArt.
Thank you, Sara.
Yeah. And thanks for inviting me to this. Very exciting. My name is Sutcliffe. I am a Principal Tech Strategist, and I support our healthcare and life science customers.
Perfect, thank you.
Thank you for the invitation. I'm Andrey, Sorokin, Solutions Architect for Healthcare and Life Sciences at DataArt.
Thank you, Andrey. Before I move to the first question that I prepared for our speakers, I would like to remind our audience, if you have any questions or comments, don't hesitate and post them in the comments section. You'll find somewhere under our webinar. Okay, let's move on with the first question. So, why does validation of the AI component in medical devices matter so much? Sara, I'll let you be the first to address this.
Thank you, Varvara. Well, AI validation matters for mainly three reasons. Of course, there is so many more of them, but I will limit my response to the most significant ones that I perceive. So first of all, it's important from clinical point of view. AI influences real medical decisions, so errors directly will affect patients, depending, of course, on the risk of the medical device. And then second, due to technical related aspects. We all know AI is not static software, and it must be tested for so many different parameters, such as robustness, bias, real-world performance. And we need to understand what we can really expect from this AI device. We also need to understand what the reason for anything that could ever go wrong in this AI SaMD. And last but not least, it's critical from a business perspective. There is a new report showing market experiences related to AI market introduction versus the number of recalls. It also shows how many of these devices did not go through validation at the same time. This report is based on the US data, but I still believe it's relevant because let's use experiences from different markets, and that will allow us not to repeat those mistakes ourselves. And I believe that you will see the link to this report so that you can refer it on your own. So to sum up, validation protects the patients, protects the technology, and also protects the business.
Thank you very much, Sara. Now, well, we know why it's important. Let's talk a little bit about the challenges. What are the biggest ones, biggest challenges that medical device manufacturers face today when developing and validating AI-based devices? Ian, I want to ask you first, from what you're seeing across the industry when working with AWS clients, where do companies struggle most?
Yeah, absolutely. So if I look across all the customers that I support in this space, I see various kind of themes. So the first theme is kind of upstream of the manufacturer, so the regulatory space. So regulatory guidance that hasn't adopted the technology advancements. Certain agencies are a little more progressive than others. I mean, we have seen guidance from FDA, for example, around machine learning, but not large language models, foundation models, agentic AI. So guidance from agencies is always behind the curve. So that's one challenge, which means there's certain uncertainty around regulatory expectations. And those requirements vary across different regions. So FDA, EMA, DKMA, you name it, there are different expectations, different requirements. There's a lot of overlap, but there's still some differences between the different regions. One of the commonalities is stringent reporting and documentation requirements, which is traditionally quite labor intensive. And when following that theme, we see that internally as well. So internally of the manufacturers, there's always a heavy focus on manual controls, so manual processes, very document-centric processes, which are codified in the customer's quality management systems. There's a lot of opportunity there for automation and streamlining that. Looking more on the technical side, there's an ever-increasing security threat landscape. So we've got more and more connected devices. There's more and more componentry. There's cloud-based. Cybersecurity is a hot topic from most regulatory agencies these days. So that's a big technical concern. That fast-moving technology is causing a lack of awareness of what technology is already available to address some of those regulatory risks. For example, there are features within Amazon SageMaker, Bedrock, that help with appropriately testing AI systems. These are fairly new. Everything's, several were announced at last reInvent. So there's always new features that people are not necessarily aware of. Also, fast-moving model landscape. If you're using third-party models from Anthropic, for example, traditional approaches to change control may not necessarily work. So traditional approaches to lock models, try not to change. That's not going to go. It's not going to work going forward because the models themselves change. So you have to deal with change and build that into your planning. So all of this means that there's also a lack of specialists. So technology is moving fast, the regulatory environment is changing. There's a lack of specialists that understand both cloud and compliance, which is why I'm really glad that we have partners like DataArt around.
Thank you, Ian. Moving to DataArt now and building on what you just said. Sara, how does this look from the regulatory and data perspective? Where do you see the challenges?
Yes, well, first of all, thank you, Ina. I agree with you 100%, especially with the points that you have mentioned about the regulations. But not to repeat you, I would like to mention that one of the challenges, the major one, is the data. Well, high quality representative data sets are so important for clinical grade AI. And it's because poor data quality may lead to biased models that will fail to provide correct inputs across the intended population, or to unstable or unreliable predictions, or invalid or even really nonsensical outputs in edge cases, but well, these are really rare cases. And from regulatory perspective, companies must be able to show where the data came from, for example, that the data was lawfully processed under GDPR, and that the data was relevant for the intended clinical use. And this requires very strict data governance and lifecycle. And without this, even technically a strong AI system will struggle to pass clinical evaluation and obtain CE marking. And another challenge that I see is managing this full AI lifecycle in a compliant way. Well, we know that medical device regulations are pretty strict. There is a lot of them. There are general and specific ones addressing specific types of products. And the same we observe in this AI field. So building AI in medical field is not a one-time activity, and it really doesn't limit to IEC 62304, because on top of the existing obligations like related to ISO 13485, we also need to build up a framework specific for AI development. And I will just mention it on a very high level. There are several processes that we need to implement on top of we already have in our regular QMS quality management systems. And one of those processes will be acquisition and pre-processing of data And on this stage, we need to ensure GDPR and MDR compliance from the very start. Then the second, very high-level approach, model training, testing, and validation. It's important to follow good practices, to train, test, and validate all on separate datasets. We need to plan different methods of testing. For example, we need to add to our testing strategy stress testing on edge cases. Next is deployment in a controlled environment using secure cloud infrastructure. So the steps I am naming one by one probably sound very simple and structured, but you can already see that it's important to have also cybersecurity controls in place. And finally, post-market monitoring. That means tracking performance, detecting drift, and revalidating the model when needed. I believe that many organizations underestimate how operationally demanding this is. Only referring to such a simplified process flow, I needed to mention several very big groups of requirements for medical software development, for AI development, cybersecurity, and the last one, data governance and privacy. So lifecycle is a challenge on its own, but then another challenge comes up as a natural consequence, which is continuous evidence generation, what already Ian mentioned. From regulatory perspective, this is particularly critical because evidence must always reflect the current version of the AI system. Validation results, documentation, performance claims cannot describe a previous model version if the system has already evolved. As the model changes through retraining, data updates, parameter adjustments, the evidence must evolve with it. Without structured and automated ways to generate and maintain this living evidence, teams will very quickly fall back to manual, document-heavy processes that do not scale. Those processes and this burden will block teams and cause a lot of dissatisfaction. So to summarize, the high-level challenge is turning all of these requirements into something that actually works in a day-to-day development and operations.
Thank you very much, Sara. You just walked us through, at least on a high level, through a life cycle, AI life cycle, which is very structured. And to move on here, Ian, back to you. How does AWS support this kind of, highly regulated end-to-end workflow in practice? Specifically, the question is around how can cloud services help teams meet quality requirements and at the same time operate more efficiently?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, what we're seeing from regulators is this, more a total product lifecycle approach to AI systems, which aligns, exactly with the workflow that Sara described. From the technical implementation perspective, so most people are already familiar with the concept of DevOps. This concept was then applied to machine learning systems, and we ended up with MLOps. Now with foundation and large language models, we have FMOps and LLMOps. And AWS services like SageMaker Unified Studio and Bedrock are all geared towards supporting this entire life cycle. So from model development, deployment, through monitoring, drift detection, triggering the cycle again for retraining and change. More importantly, the features of these services support the automation of your FM or LLM ops process with built-in quality controls and guardrails needed for such regulated development. One of the key interests from customers is around automated testing, for example. So regulations are very clear that when it comes to deterministic systems, but LLMs and non-deterministic systems, as Sara said, where responses may vary and there's a risk of hallucination. This is where there needs to be a kind of a mindset shift. So testing is no longer kind of a pass-fail, but it has a range of acceptability, and that range is based on the risk. So there are still automated test frameworks, but now we have new testing mechanisms like human in the loop or LLM as a judge, which is where one model is used to assess the output of the primary model, which then raises additional questions about how to trust the judge. But what you're using is that human in the loop to start to create your test data, which you then compare against the judge and its determination. Hopefully they agree, or even the judge starts to exceed that human review, because we're all fallible. Hopefully the LLM is not. So automated testing through the use of an additional LLM. That's very important when it comes to, you want to make changes, or you could use the same mechanism in production to maybe more of a sampling approach to assess how the model is doing. Leads on to another area of particular interest for customers is the change that I mentioned, or rather controlling that change. I've talked to several customers wanting to take a traditional approach to controlling change, which basically means not making any change, locking models. The problem is, certainly for LLMs, is that the creators of these models are coming out with new versions all the time. Old versions are deprecated. Now, you could look at techniques like distillation to train a smaller model that you control, but the model isn't the only thing that's changing. The real world data is continually changing too, so it's actually risky to take that approach of locking. I would recommend customers embrace change, deploy robust processes, and more importantly, automation to deal with it. And this actually aligns with regulatory guidance. So the FDA introduced the idea of predetermined change control plans. So they're aware that change is inevitable, but plan for it. I mentioned earlier that many customers still have very manual document-centric processes. What I help them do is shift to more data-centric automated processes. The tools I mentioned also generate evidence in the form of IT records, not to be confused with GXP records, that you need to demonstrate control effectiveness, that the system is working as expected. And these are all standard features of the tooling from AWS.
You just mentioned evidence, right? Thank you, Ian, for that. Let's talk about it for a little bit. What does good AI evidence actually look like today, and how much data is considered to be enough for AI validation?
I can continue. So I'm a firm believer of separating IT quality from product quality. This has various benefits, including letting IT be IT and focus on engineering best practices. They then work with the product quality teams to determine which of those IT records are appropriate as evidence, and that IT is satisfying their regulatory requirements. I mentioned our AI tooling can generate IT records. Those records demonstrate good AI engineering practices are being followed. However, the exact records needed and how much to demonstrate regulatory compliance is usually defined by the customer's quality management system, the manufacturer's quality management system. So maybe there are two things, those two things should be the same, but sometimes are not. Andrey is closer to the manufacturers, so I'll let him weigh in on this.
Thank you. So first of all, if someone asks how much data is enough for AI validation of my particular model, the honest answer would be there's no fixed number that solves any problem possible. And more importantly, regulators, they don't expect one. They just anticipate a justified risk-based rationale behind this number or process, basically, how the model is validated. In practice, we need to start with something, and normally we begin with as little as maybe a few hundred well-curated evaluation samples, ideally evaluated and labeled by human beings. That's what we call gold data set, and that's normally enough to detect major failures early. The coverage across different languages, edge cases, this pushes this number to thousands of samples easily. And we need to keep in mind that metrics like accuracy, recall, precision, or in case of LLM, something like faithfulness, are not absolute truths about your data set or about your model. They are just statistical estimates. And statistics gives us another powerful instrument, confidence intervals. Just to give an example, if something like an accuracy of a computer vision model gives you an estimate of 90% with 10% confidence interval, then in case if you would like to reduce this confidence interval, then you would need more than 100 times more samples. And that's why this validation process and collecting this evaluation data set becomes really expensive, because it either requires input from subject matter experts or additional label and preparation using LLM as a judge, for instance, or some other technique. Annotate and review this, and this becomes even not a technical problem anymore. I would like to kind of draft an analogy with computer vision models. Like 10 or 15 years ago, it was all about labeling skin lesions and computer images of some medical images and supervised data sets preparation. And now you still need to spend and invest into evaluation data set preparation. So we can say that this bottleneck has shifted towards evaluation. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrey. Very interesting and insightful. Sara, I would like to address the same question to you. What does a good AI evidence look from the regulatory standpoint under MDR, GDPR, and, well, specifically European AI Act?
Thank you, Barbara and Ian and Andrey. I think it will be difficult to listen to a very specific answer to the audience, because I'm afraid I would bore everyone and cause them all fall asleep if I started to enlist all of the documents. But I'll try to at least walk everyone through the high level and my approach and what I know from my experience with different notified bodies and with different AI products. So from regulatory standpoint, good AI validation evidence means evidence that is risk-based, complete, and kept up to date. And that it will help us to demonstrate that we have some sense of control over this AI system through its life cycle. So let's begin from the proportionality to the risk. Regulators, in my opinion, do not expect that every part of an AI system will be documented and tested in the same way or with the same depth and details. What they expect is that we understand where the real risks are, and this means we need to identify which parts of the AI system may be troublesome, which areas of this AI system pose higher risks, and where do we identify and find any element that may even represent critical risk. Once those risks areas are clearly understood, we can plan validation activities accordingly and adjust the resulting evidence. So this means that we can decide which documents need to be more detailed and which may remain on a high level. We can determine which test suites require deeper testing, larger data sets, or more robust statistical justification, and identifying which aspects of the product need intensive validation versus those that can reasonably rely on some standard verification or existing controls. Then I've mentioned risk controls, and the second one is currency and completeness. Good AI validation evidence must be complete, and it must reflect the current state of the system, and not an outdated snapshot, as I mentioned and explained earlier. And of course, again, we still need to comply with all of the existing controls for documentation, for validation. We need to keep up with all the requirements for specific protocols. For example, if we go for clinical trials, I'm just mentioning the ones that are, from my perspective, the most relevant for specifically AI. Again, from regulatory perspective, the requirement of complete evidence, getting back to the topic, means that all applicable regulations and legal requirements are covered. And for AI-enabled products, this typically includes the EU AI Act, Medical Device Regulation, MDR or IVDR, and the GDPR. And you may hope it's the end of the list, but in some cases, there are some additional requirements, legal acts that also come into play and will be applicable and relevant. And one of these cases can be DataArt. if your AI system is integrated with some other systems, for example, in the hospital. Those requirements from these different sources that I've just enlisted overlap and reinforce each other. When you will be studying perhaps yourself those regulations, you will meet oftentimes repeating names like, for example, technical documentation, risk management, intended use. I can name more of those, but yeah, just to give you some examples, data governance and data quality are the main requirements under the AI Act, but they are also directly linked to GDPR principles, such as data minimization, purpose limitation, accuracy, and so on, so on. And then I already mentioned risk management several times and post-market monitoring, the same Andrey also mentioned, drift monitoring, and so on. And those are required under MDR, and also they are also mentioned in AI Act. It's important from the perspective of continuous monitoring, corrective actions. Another example, transparency and traceability appear across all of those frameworks. Under the AI Act, it's important for explainability of the AI system. Under the MDR for clinical and technical evidence. And then under the GDPR for accountability and data subject rights. So as you can see, those frameworks, those requirements are really huge. Every single of these regulations have several, more than 100 pages, that's for sure. Okay, but getting further, I would also like to comment on the LLM as a judge that Andrey and Ian mentioned. Using any automation, in my experience, is a really good thing. It makes our operations more efficient. Personally, I'm working internally and externally with project teams. And during this cooperation, I received a lot of feedback on the documentation burden. And honestly, I'm not surprised because meeting all of those necessary requirements really often results in 1,000-page documents, several thousand-page submissions. That's why I'm a huge fan of automation. It's a subjective opinion. I also enjoy introducing innovation into workflows. And LLM as a judge can really help with reviews. It can really help with catching some red flags, pinpointing some challenges or issues. But from regulatory standpoint, of which we cannot forget, such LLM's output cannot be used for regulatory purposes in isolation. That means that we can use it, but if we at the same time maintain some meaningful human oversight. Regulators believe, and well, I also tend to agree, that if you're using LLM as a judge, then you may transfer some of the biases to the subject AI system. So if you are currently using such element of your submission without human oversight, you can expect that most probably this element of your submission will be rejected. You may need to redo the testing or to provide additional information.
Thank you so much, Sara, for giving this clear explanation of such complex things. We have discussed already several aspects: technology, regulation, methodology. Well, many companies can't tackle all of this alone, which brings us to the last question for today, at least the last question from my side. How can cloud services like AWS, together with partners like DataArt, support secure and compliant AI validation workflows in practice? What are our roles here? Ian, if you could start.
Sure. Yeah, so from my perspective, AWS has the technology to support compliant AI development and automation, but we're always one step removed from the day-to-day delivery of actual medical devices. There's also a kind of a compliance boundary where I'm not permitted to give regulatory advice. I may have many opinions, but I'm not officially allowed to give regulatory advice. I also mentioned earlier that kind of a separation between IT and product quality. So AWS can advise on good IT engineering practices, but not which IT records demonstrate regulatory compliance, for example. So given an analogy, I can help customers automate the generation of their regulatory submissions, but I can't tell you what to put in those submissions to be compliant and get your device approved. So for me, DataArt are the experts on that side. So there's a natural synergy for AWS and DataArt to collaborate on such projects.
Andrey, I ask you to speak from the DataArt side on this one, please.
Absolutely. So basically, we are the ones building on top of AWS services. And the good thing that AWS and ML services natively supports all these building blocks that we require, including model evaluation, ongoing model monitoring, and something like prediction explainability, if it's applicable, of course. So if we talk more detailed into the technical recipes, if we talk about LLMs alone, then AWS Bedrock is a solid service managed, supporting managed evaluation to analyze, for instance, bias, toxicity, correctness of the AI pipelines using both techniques, human in the loop and LLM as a judge. And basically, this is the gold evaluation data set that we discussed previously. So the best thing that the development teams, they do not have to operate the infrastructure manually. So everything from model deployment to evaluation is handled there in this service. And it also has another great capability around LLMs invocation, which is guardrails. So even if your model or pipeline has some flaws, made a mistake, then guardrails is safety net that could redact PII data and restrict some topics. It could be maybe not harmful like Raspberry Pi recipe, but it could be much more than that. And yeah, this is the great way to prevent hallucinations and ground the responses based on the knowledge basis and your actual documents, reducing these, just side effects. And if we go beyond LLMs, then there's SageMaker Clarify that helps to analyze more than 20 metrics for computer vision models, maybe linear regression. Also, it does robustness testing and tracks some other explainability metrics. And these are the artifacts regulators sometimes expect to see when assessing risk mitigation, for instance. Another thing is post-market surveillance and automatic detection of data concept or explanation drift that allows teams to trigger revalidation and sometimes retraining of their models fully automatically. This is MLOps approach because it is hard to react, just without this level of automation. In the most cases, we're talking that there's kind of synergy between something like SageMaker Model Monitor and some metrics as these AWS Clarify or some custom developed metrics that help you to basically operationalize your workloads, evaluation, retraining, redeployment. That's, I think, covers the most of this.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Andrey. I'd like to thank our speakers, all of you guys, for a great overview, for, it's an in-depth discussion. And I suggest to take a look at the questions from the audience, the questions that our team has collected. And let me take a look what we have here. I think I've seen a question for Sara. And I think I would like to start with this one. Will manufacturers need two separate notified bodies to certify medical AI? Sara.
Thank you. We actually don't know yet because right now there is no notified body designated to certify AI systems in Europe. So we still need to wait until we understand which companies may conduct the audits. I hope that this will be the case, that we will be able to have all audits in with one company, with one notified body. But unfortunately, this is still a song of the future.
Thank you very much, Sara. And I'd like to stay with you for a moment, since I have a question about the AI Act. A lot of people are asking a lot of questions about it. How much time do manufacturers have to prepare for the AI Act, for the European AI Act? It's a little high-level question, but let's answer in the context of what of our discussion, of course.
Yeah, of course. So AI Act has planned phased rollout of different requirements. And I believe that for most medical device manufacturers of high-risk devices, the deadline will be August 2027. But I would largely recommend to start preparing as soon as possible if you haven't yet. Because as you can see, of course, I was trying to be very high level and not focus on specific details, but really there is a lot of different requirements to comply with.
Good, thank you for this recommendation, Sara. Next question, how do you control and document bias, drift, and robustness post-deployment? I think, Andrey, this one is for you.
Yeah, I will take this one. So basically, as Ian said, and what we discussed today, your data, your ML model, these are not static. And this is impossible to basically, I don't know, just use some resin to make it absolutely fixed for all the eternity. Your basically distribution of input data, even your concept changes, meaning that maybe you haven't addressed a specific group of people, maybe for another medical procedure in another country, something like this. And your previous data sets basically should be enhanced, extended with this new data that you collect. You need to review and evaluate and label, process this data, and include this into tracking the metrics of your model. And depending on the thresholds, some of these labeling can be done automatically, but there are action points, basically, when you cross, for instance, some statistical test for concept drift between your input data and predicate labels, and you need to retrain, redeploy, and bring a new version to the production. So that's how we're controlling that.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Andrey. And I have one more for you. What stops an LLM on Bedrock from giving an unsafe or hallucinated answer?
So the short answer is nothing prevents LLM model on Bedrock from giving an unsafe or hallucinated answer. And that's why we're using very specific techniques. First of all, including some factual information in the context, relevant information, which is known as RAG technique, for instance. This basically makes the answers grounded. And if you use kind of another safety net, like guardrails, then basically this gives you another level of isolation around the LLM answer. So you could basically filter out this unsafe information. At the same time, and this is what's the most critical today, you need to have these gold evaluation data sets to regularly measure the performance of your model. If you don't have this intellectual property, then basically there's nothing you have to prevent these models from hallucinating, right? Because you cannot compare your previous model behavior to the latest one. And that's what we've discussed, I mean, in the most details today.
Perfect. Thank you, Andrey, for clarifying this here. I'm looking at the questions, and I don't see any new ones coming from the audience. But, well, I don't want to wrap up yet. Before we say goodbye for today, I'd like to ask our speakers share, well, let's call it a key takeaway or maybe a recommendation for manufacturers who produce AI-driven medical devices. And who would like to start? Ian, maybe you?
Sure, why not? Yeah, I mean, at a high level, I would recommend manufacturers really focus on trying to establish a culture of quality, often, over compliance. So too often we focus on the compliance, which is, extremely important. But certainly from the technical teams, if you focus on good engineering practices, you leverage the features of the tooling, you embrace automation, it will put you in a much stronger position than some of the old school, very compliance-centric ways of working. So that would be my final thought.
Great, thank you. Sara, Andrey.
Okay, then let it be me. I would like to recommend planning for frameworks early to avoid double work, any delays in the projects. I really observed that so many times that it was difficult, or the tasks were doubled, the documentation was doubled, and actually departments were working in silos rather than cooperating together. And with so much of overlap between different regulations, it's really smarter and faster and more efficient to integrate those frameworks into integrated management system. And then I believe that it will be easier for the teams to follow such a system, and we will be able to reduce any kind of misunderstandings.
Wonderful.
In my perspective, I believe that the most important idea is that training model and maintaining the pipelines is not a one-time job, is a process. So from process perspective, you need to maintain your IP, your evaluation data set, steward basically the data that you have, and rely on your processes, your operational things. And in order to do that, you need to create ML pipelines. You need to be able to integrate reliable services such as AWS, AI and ML services in the final solution. And that is how you could achieve really reliable, bulletproof solutions.
Great. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Andrey, Sara, Ian, for joining today. If you have any questions or comments, please don't hesitate to contact our speakers. Stay tuned for the upcoming webinars. Thank you and goodbye.